So we're going to start with Harry Heistand. He was officially announced. What was it, yesterday, Brian? But this is the what felt like the longest time period between knowing he was coming back and him officially being announced. But Harry Heistand is announced as the offensive line coach. So walking in the door, we know that he hit the ground running recruiting. And I want to put this out there as well. We're not necessarily going to talk about what these coaches
We're not going to talk about anything about recruiting.
Right.
This is going to be focusing on the team.
Right. What's on the roster right now.
We'll have that show later when, because we actually have, recruiting dedicated shows now.
There may be a different guy in my seat when that conversation takes place. You know what I mean? But, or Brian and I might switch spots for that show. You never know. But anyway, so Harry Heistand, what does he need to do with the current roster? Was there 17 offensive linemen, I think is what you said earlier?
Yeah, 17. Right? I don't expect it to be quite that. I think at least one coach or one player. I don't expect John Dirksen back.
Okay.
But other than that, I mean, it's a lot of players. Now, 10 of them are freshmen and sophomores, right? Incoming freshmen and rising sophomores. So this is actually going to be somewhat of a young group, not like last year's, but it's going to have more playing experience than maybe what we saw last year.
Right.
So that'll be a positive.
The number one thing, and you and I both had it on because you made a list, I made a list, we kind of compared lists. The number one thing on both of our lists is you need to instill physicality back into this position group. And I wrote down rebuild the fight. You wrote down instill physicality, both meaning the exact same thing. That's by far the number one thing that needs to happen with this group. They were just too passive.
And this is an issue. This has been an issue 3 of the last 4 years. Right. The one exception being, and I think we need to talk about something else, not just Harry Heistand. It's not just Harry Heistand's coming back to Notre Dame. It's also Chris Watt. Chris Watt, they're not going to announce the hire. That's what I was told, that they're not going to announce Chris Watt because they only announce, full-time coaches basically. Yeah, right. So, which I'm sorry, when an alum comes back to work for you in any capacity, it should be celebrated. Missed opportunity, but whatever.
Is he official? Is he back on campus?
Yeah, he's already back in South Bend. And now, again, is it official in that all the paperwork is signed and all that other stuff? I don't know, but I know he's back in South Bend. He's been for a week, and it's good to go.
That's all I need.
So the lack of toughness, and not even toughness, because I don't think the linemen under Jeff Quinn lacked toughness. They didn't lack the desire to compete.
Sure.
Jeff Quinn never put a line out there that didn't want to be physical. They just weren't taught how to be physical. So I don't want to start, now that he's gone, start taking cheap shots at Jeff Quinn. His guys didn't lack toughness. They lacked the tools to go play physical football. 3 out of the 4 years, the one exception being 2020 when they had a line dominated by Harry Heistand's recruits and guys that were coached by Harry Heistand. And they had Chris Watt, who you talk to any of the players on that team, they'll tell you Chris Watt had a big role on that football team. I mean, there's not anyone that's actually around the program that says otherwise. There's fans on message boards that have no knowledge of the situation whatsoever, that like having dumb takes, that will say Chris Watt was a GA. He didn't have an impact. Ignoring the fact that Tommy Reese was the quarterback's coach in 2017 as a GA.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
But ask anyone that actually played on the team. He had a big role in what they did in 2020. And he is now back in a different role than he had in 2020. But having those two guys back, because now Harry Heistand has someone that he can say, hey, look, I'm going to be over here doing this, and I need you to get in the film room and do this with these kids. Because analysts can be involved off the field in everything.
Right.
They just can't be coaching on the field. That's where they can't, which I think is kind of a dumb rule, but whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you look at this whole thing, it's the first step, the most important step, and the first two kind of go hand in hand, but the most first step is it's a mentality thing. That's why we went this direction more so than the other. It's a mentality thing. Like, you have to have a deep burning desire to physically whoop the man across from you.
Yes.
And I don't think that's an area where Jeff Quinn thrived enough, right? It's not that he didn't value it. It's not that his players were soft. It wasn't anything like that. There just wasn't enough of an emphasis on you're out there in a street fight. That's what line play is. It's like a street fight.
Every down, every play.
You've got to be willing to battle and scrap and fight and claw for every inch. And then the second part of it, and I'm going to kind of tie these together, is you got to get back to playing the game the right way. And they're 2 points, but they have to be talked about as one, because wanting to be tough and physical is part mindset and part being taught how to properly be physical. Because if you just go out there and just like, I want to fight and scrap and claw, and then you just like head down,
right,
miss, sack, I mean, it's about how to play that way. What is the proper technique necessary to go out and play the game with with physicality, but also understand that there's a method, there's got to be a method to the madness, so to speak, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that was missing from this football team. And, we talked about things like, they would catch, right? Well, that's a technical problem. You guys saw it, last season, as more and more people started to watch the offensive line play, you'd see them pick one foot up, pick one foot down, pick the other foot up, put it down, and then just kind of absorb contact, right? That's a technical problem. That's not a lack of toughness. If anything, it takes more toughness to sit there and wait on the guy to come at you.
Just take it.
So it's about physicality, not toughness. I will never question the toughness of the Notre Dame offensive line in the last 4 years. They were willing to battle. They just weren't taught how to battle, right, properly. And so it's stepping with power, bringing that back foot kind of with you to kind of get your hips to drive forward, and then coming with power and striking through force and kind of punching through the defender, then driving your feet through contact. All those things are technical things that they weren't taught. And the reason I can say that confidently is because when all 5 guys are consistently not doing it,
right, they're all doing the same
dumb
thing.
or you're not teaching it. And we all know they're not dumb. The Notre Dame players are not dumb. So clearly they're not being taught the way to take what you're seeing in practice and translate it onto the football field.
Right.
And that was an issue in 2018 to a degree, but you were still kind of benefiting from the Harry Heistand effect in 2018. 2019, they took a big step back in that regards. 2020, step back up for the reasons that we mentioned. And then what we said before the season was, this was a big year for Jeff Quinn, because this is the first year he's not coaching a bunch of Harry Heistand guys.
And you didn't have
one Harry Heistand,
right? You didn't have a Harry Heistand disciple at GA as well.
And and I don't want to blame. I've heard the new GA is a good coach and all those kind of things, but he didn't have Harry Heistand working with him on a daily basis. But the point is, you had 4 starting linemen that were never coached by Harry Heistand ever, and we saw the worst offensive line play in a long time at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And it's not a coincidence. That's what our fear was coming into the season. And it's because they weren't taught how to play. There weren't the veterans on the team that did learn under Harry Heistand that could set the example for the younger players anymore. And so those are the things that, like, we had story after story about. It was Alex Bars in 2018. It was Robert Hainsey in 2019. It was Chris Watt in 2020. The Harry Heistand pipeline that was able to kind of step into that vacuum and say, hey, I know we're not being taught this, but we need to do this. And they were able to try, at least in some regards, to overcome it. And this year, there just wasn't that anymore. And so to me, instilling physicality has to be coupled with getting back to playing the game the right way. And technique and footwork and all those things are impeccable. And they have to be a big part of who you are, and a big part of this is if you want to be great, this is what's needed. And I think those, to me, that's the foundation of what is needed when it comes to offensive line play at Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, could not agree more. I had rebuild the fight and I had fundamentals. And that's, again, those are 2 very similar ways to look at what needs to happen with this offensive line. And I have faith that is going to happen, because those were like the calling cards of a Harry Heistand coached offensive line. I mean, you could always count on these guys are going to be fundamentally sound, and they were going to take the fight to the defense. And so I'm excited about what I think those 2 things can happen. Now, those aren't big questions for me, but that's the charge. I mean, that's what needs to take place from Harry Heistand and Chris Watt moving forward. Now,